So we'll continue Ois Dalad. Umamshich b'hamaimer. So the Maimer continues. He discusses that through the avodah that we do bisman hagolus, because we have to struggle, and because we have to do this kafia and this hapra, that's why the aliyah that we will have later on in the time of the Osid will have a greater gilui even than the gilui that we had in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Because in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the gilui did not come through Iskafia. But in the time of La'asid Lavoi, since in Golus we are struggling, it's Iskafia, it's Hapcha, so that's why the gilui will be a greater one. So Mamshich b'hamaimer. So in the Maimer he continues, La'acharei shemevayer ba'arucha, after he explains at length, Sham shochas ike shchina betachtonim, that we draw down the main shchina in tachtonim, he al yidei ha'avoida di iskafya v'ishapcha, is through the work, the service of iskafya v'ishapcha. So after he brings down this idea that that's how we bring down the Shechina, he says, "Shal shem zeh nikroim Yisrael v'shem tzivos Hashem." That's why, because they bring it down, that's why they're called tzivos Hashem. It's going to mitzad ha'avodah shalahem the iskafia v'ishapcha, because the avodah of iskafia and ishapcha that the Yidden serve, that makes them the army of Hashem. That makes them the tzivos Hashem. The Rebbe is going to explain now the two aspects, iskafia and ishapcha. These are the two aspects why the Yidden are called tzivos Hashem, because of iskafia and ishapcha. The Rebbe is going to explain that there is something about conquering new areas and turning in them into the army goes and gets new places, and that means it's hapcha, that it acquired new territory for the king. So when a Yid makes the world a place for Hashem, he's basically his hapcha, he's required new territory for Hashem. The actual war, that's the iskafia. This is the part in which the struggle. The ishapcha is the chiddush. Let's look inside. So we can say the explanation of what is the shaykhis of iskafia and ishapcha to an army. The Rebbe is going to explain how an army does two things. It does the iskafia, and it does also ishapcha. So he says like this: that's what they're called, the armies of Hashem. Mitzad ha'avodah shalohem the iskafia v'ishapcha. With these two parts, iskafia v'ishapcha. So we can say the explanation it is the hachiluk shebein tzova, the difference between the army, which is anshe chayil, those are the soldiers, the people who are fighting, ubein hasorim ukiyetzuboy, and then you have the officers, the people who are ministers in the government. They are occupied in improving the matters of the government. You have an army, and then you have the political, you have the officers What's the difference? So he says, "Hubishnei inyonim," two things that the army, the soldiers, in which they differ with the improvement that is brought about by the officers. The officers that are running the country aren't bringing in new places. There's no novelty there. They're just dealing with the country to make it better, as opposed to the army people. Number one, they actually bring in no more territory. And the other thing is the level of bittul of the army people. Let's look aside. Hein b'ha'pu'ula b'ha'medina shenasis al yodo. First of all, what is the impact in the country that is done through army people versus the people who are sorim, the officers in the government? Through the fact that they go out to war to conquer the enemy, that brings about a novelty in the government of the king, that now the king has more territory. They conquered the place of the Oyev. The officers don't deal with conquering new territory. They're busy, and their job is to improve the territory that the king already has. So the actions of the soldiers is to bring a novelty, a chiddush, in the government of the king. Shegam oisa hamedina shehoisa tchila b'rshusa oyev nasis medina samelach. So that also that country that in the beginning was in the domain under the control of the enemy, now it becomes the king. So that's the accomplishment of the soldiers, is to bring in new territory. As opposed to the improvement of the country and increasing its power, which comes by the officers, not by the soldiers. It's not in a way of a novelty. There's no new. It's just an increase in the running of the government. That is if we measure the accomplishment of soldiers versus the officer versus the sorim, but also the attitude of sorim and soldiers is also different to the level of bittul. And also there's a difference as the army, not but what the army people, not what the soldiers accomplish, but the army themselves. Their devotion, the way they gives themselves over to the king, is above any limitation. To the extent shemisaknim as nafshom kishayotzim lemilchama, they endanger their lives when they go out to milchama. That's the extent of the devotion of the army people. So this would be in a time of war, they're actually endangering themselves. But it's not only when they're actually fighting, it's also when they're not fighting, that dedication is there all the time. They're always ready, even more than this. Shehem muchonim tamid, they're always prepared. Gam sheloi be'es milchama, even when it's not a war. Soldiers are always prepared, limsoir nafsham, to give up their lives, to mibli lintois ma'asher nitztavu, not to tilt away from that which they were commanded, which is maila sabitl. This is the advantage of it. Zehu sheYisrael nikroyim b'shem tzivus havaya. So now, this two aspects also explains why Yidden are called the army of Hashem. We're the soldiers of Hashem. Umitzad ha'avodah shalahem is their service of both iskafia v'ishapcha, to subdue and to turn around. The inyan is hapcha, the idea of turning around. Shemahapich es ha'olam, you turn around the world, because the world before the yid turns it around, shemare es atzme limitzias, the world shows itself as it's an entity. Shezehu inyan hasheker di olam. That's the falsehood of the world, to pretend that it appears that it has an entity. And you swap it around, liyis migdosh v'dira lo yizbarach, to become a sanctuary and a dwelling place for Hashem. That's the idea of his hapcha. Udugmas hakibush shabo al yidei hamilchama. So that is similar to the conquering which comes through the war. Through the war, you conquer, you take the world which shows itself a Messias, and you make it into a Mikdash. The inyan ha iskafia, and what is the idea of iskafia? He hamilchama. That is the war, atzma. The war itself conquered, but the war itself is the iskafia. Shaloichem neged yitzrei. He wages war against his inclination. You have his hapka and you have his kafia. The hamailo, the iskafia, what's the advantage of the pushing and subduing yourself? He be inyan habitl. That's the advantage is in bitl. Shemisalik umaniach es atzmei al hatzad. He removes and puts himself on the side. He's a non-entity. He's not a player over here. Whatever the Eibishter wants, because of the Ratzon of Hashem, doesn't matter what he wants, who he is, he puts himself aside because of the Ratzon, because of the wishes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the Maila of Iskafia. Okay, so the Rebbe explained basically why are Yidden called Tzivas Hashem, because Iskafia and Ishapcha, and the two aspects of the Anshi Tzava, that they are more than the Sorim in the novelty that they conquer new areas and that they push themselves, they fight, and level of bittul. And this is Iskafia and Ishapcha. That's why the Yidden are the Tzivas Hashem. So the Maimer continues, just like in a physical war, that in order to win the war, then you splurge all the treasures, and you give those treasures through the officers that are in charge. They're appointed so that the people of the army, the soldiers, to have the necessary means so that they can win the war. Similarly, it's also above. In order for the armies of Hashem to win the war, we give to them, we give to the Neshamas Yisrael, and in a way of splurging, the treasures of above. And that's given to the Yidden in order for them to win the war. Hey. So here we talked about the difference of Iskafia v'Ishapcha. The Iskafia is bittul. That's, you are ready and you put yourself away for the Ratzon Hashem. And Ishapcha is a novelty that you brought in new territory for Hashem. And the Rebbe explains now, they bring down from above a different level of light. The Avodah of Iskafia brings one light, and the Avodah of Ishapcha brings another light. The Avodah of Iskafia draws down from above even a higher light. In a achil ukshabein shtei ha'avodas, the Iskafia of Ishapcha, the difference between the two services of Iskafia and Ishapcha, Higam v'ha'hamshocha shenimsheches al yodam, also is in the drawing down. What is drawn down through this avodah, there's a difference what we draw down through Iskafia, and that which we draw down through is Hapcha. Shehamshocha shal yidei ha'avodah de Iskafia. What we bring down through the work of Iskafia, hinailis yoiser, it's an elevated greater, the hamshocha shal yidei ha'avodah de Ishapcha, than the hamshocha that we get from the avodah of Ishapcha. The kad is kafir sitra achra, because the way we say from the Zohar that when the sitra achra is subdued, and here we don't say ishapcha, iskafia davke. Davke, when there is iskafia, then the Zohar says istalik yikore the kuchabrichu b'kula om. Then we get the precious level of kuchabrichu, which is oil which stands in istalkus, removal in all the world. How do we get the yikore the kuchabrichu b'kula omin? We get it through iskafia. That's why it says kad iskafia, davke through iskafia. Hamshochas v'gilu atzmus eirin sof. That means that we draw down and reveal the essence of the eirin sof, shalamayla mishaychus le'olamus, which is higher than having a connection to the world. And shalochein, because we're talking about the soil, nikras hamshocha zu b'shem istalik. That's why we call this istalik. It's a oir which is a removable oir. It's beyond. It's the essence of the Ein Sof. It doesn't have a connection to the world. It's a oir in a way of a removed oir. Lefi shu gilui ha'oir. Because this is revealing the light, which is an exalted light. So that is specifically through Iskafia. So the Rebbe explains, why do we call this light Istalik? We're actually drawing down a light. But when you draw down a light which is higher than being able to connect to the world, it's called an Oir of Histalkus because it's a removed Oir. Which, by the way, the Rebbe is going to say, talking about the Histalkus of the Friedrich Rebbe and Yud. So the Rebbe is saying that it's not a removal, it's just a higher light. Ulahoyir, to point out, Shekamoikein Hugam, the same idea is when the tzaddikim are nistalik. So pashtus nistalik means they're removed, they're no longer here. So he says, no, just like we're talking about nistalik yikora the kuchabrichu, doesn't mean that the oir is not here. Fakert. It means that it's an oir which is higher. She'eno. So when we talk about histalkus tzaddikim, it doesn't literally mean that they're removed. Because the shepherd of Israel never neglect the sheep that they shepherd. They don't neglect them. But on the contrary, histalkus means by the tzaddik, hamshocha nailis yoser, a elevated and a greater drawing down. Hamshocha min nishmas atzadik atzmo. Then you draw down from the soul of the tzaddik himself, as opposed to a level in which the tzaddik reveals and comes down according to the world. You get the tzaddik's neshama itself, she'eino mugbeles b'techli ulevush, which isn't limited in a vessel or a garment. It's not in a body. You get from the neshama itself. So why do we call it histalkus? That it's removed. Because it is a revelation which is higher than dressing up in kelim. That's why we call it histalkus. The Rebbe said this maimer in Tafshin Lamed, which is 20 years since Tafshin Yud. So the Rebbe said, especially after 20 years, the limker benichse aviv, then adds the idea of selling in the assets of the father. The halacha is that the orphan, while he is under 20 years old, he's not allowed to sell the real estate, the assets of his father. He's not allowed to sell it. But when he matures and he reaches the age of 20, so then he is allowed to sell the assets of his fathers. Basically, it means that he gained a stronger possession of his inheritance to the extent that he can even go ahead and sell it. So that means that the Yidden, or after 20 years of the histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, when the Rebbe is saying in this Maimer, we have attained a greater connection, that we have even the ability to sell b'nichse avim. Shezeh koyi gam al hatalmidim shel hatzadik. This also applies to the students of the tzaddik, bonim, because they're called bonim. So that means students of the tzaddik are able to sell, are matured enough. The Likutei explains, sages tell us that you can only sell the assets of the father. You have to be at least 20 years old. Who explains the Alter Rebbe in Likutei ki oz nichnosin boy makife abo, because when he turns 20, the surrounding lights, the makife abo, the surrounding lights of Chochmah, enter the sun. In other words, you get this higher level after 20 years, which you didn't have the whole time. Only after 20 years, you get the makif of abo. Makifim shalemailo mislapshus bekelim, which are levels of surrounding, which are beyond dressing up in kelim. So that's like histalkus, but this is even after 20 years, especially. The Rebbe says, "V'yesh lekasher zeh." We can tie this idea of you getting the makifim of Abba that are higher than dressing up in kelim. Gamim zeh she'esrim begematria keser. Also, that 20 is the gematria of keser. Keser is actually 620. But if you take each letter, let's see, so you have 4, it's 620. I'm trying to think. As the Matri Keser, that brings down here. Let me see. How is Esrim Bigamatria Keser? It's 6. Keser is 620. Tov Reish is 620. But I think also the Mispar Cotton, it's two. I got to take a look at this. I don't remember offhand. Okay, so in any event, Esrim is Keser. So we can explain this that Esrim is Kapia Mavur Bilkutish Teiresham, the Pirush HaKosuf. Torah explains in Likutei Torah, it says Su'us es reish goimer ligul giloisam mi ben esrim shana. It says that you count them ligul giloisam. Gul giloisam is going to teach his keser is when you turn 20 years old. That's when you come to the gul giloisam. The gul giloisam who keser. Gul giloisam is keser. That's gal galta. V'al yidei shanim shochim. Hamakifim the Abba, and through the fact that you bring down the Makifim of Abba, then you can have the elevation when you have the level of Makifim the Abba, you can go up to the level of Kesef. And that means that after 20 years, you are able to receive Noisef al Bechinas Chaya, in addition to the level of Chaya, Shal Nishmas Tzadik, of the Nisham of the Tzadik, Gam Bechinas Yechida Shalo. You can also get the level of Yechida. Basically, up till 20 years, you get the level of Chaya. You get the level of the Shama of the Tzaddik, you connect to the level of Chaya of the Nishmas Tzaddik. But after 20 years, which is Tafshin Lamed, 20 years after the Rebbe's his Talkus on Yud Shvat Tafshin Yud, you were able to get into the level of his Yechida, Gam his Yechida. Kimavur B'Kutei Torah Sham, Shemakivim the Abba of Gilgalta over there, the Makifim of Abba and Gilgalta, Hem Chaya v'Yechida. So Makifim the Abba is the level of Chaya, and then you can go into the level of Gilgalta, which would be the level of Yechida. And that's the advantage of the year 20 years. So basically, the Rebbe talked about the oir that is a level kadis kafia, that we get the level of istalik yikor de kuchubrichu. So the Rebbe brought out that the same thing is by the istalkus of a tzaddik, and b'chlal the istalkus of a tzaddik doesn't mean that he's not here, but it means that we tap into a level which cannot be nislabish in the nishus tzaddik. And the Rebbe more specifically says that after 20 years, when it becomes the time of Libke B'Nichse Aviv, so you not only get the level of Chaya, but you actually also get the level of Yechida. The Rebbe is going to continue now in Oisvov. The main thing of the Maimer of that year of Tafshin Lamed, which was the 20th year of Amshir Sari. Well, Maimer Beperik Esrim, 20th chapter, Haperik Hashayach Lashon Azu, that's the chapter that is connected to this year. The Ridas Anashoma Beguf, Eino Bishvil Atzmo, that the Neshama came down in the body not for the Neshama, for itself. Why did the Eibishter send down the Neshama? It's not for the Neshama's sake. The Neshama Atzma Eino Tzricha Tikkun. Neshama itself does not need any correction. So the Neshama before was good as it was. So why does the Neshama come down? Not for its own self. And the fact that it came down below the is in order to fix and to purify and to sort out as a guf and afsha the body and the natural soul. That's why it came down. As the Alter Rebbe writes in the Tanya, based on that which is written in Eitz Chaim. So that's why the neshama came down, is to help and purify and elevate the body and his natural soul. And he says this is similar to the secret that the Shekhinah comes down in exile to sort out the sparks, to elevate the sparks. The neshama comes down to the body to elevate the body and the nefesh ativus. So what does he say via Shloimar? So the Rebbe adds, we can say this Esha Omer Shu Dugmas, so it Golus Hashchina. What does he say and add that this is similar to the secret of the exile of Shechina, who K'al Yidei Dugmazu, through this example, move on, Dizeh Shan Neshama. He just clarifies when we say Shan Neshama in its Tzricha Tikun, who we say that neshama doesn't require tikkun. So he wants to clarify it doesn't need tikkun at all. Besides that, the neshama doesn't need a tikkun, actual, just like all nivroim. The neshama doesn't need tikkun. So it didn't come down for itself, but it's all set. But he wants to add and explain it needs no tikkun. Because that's why he brings the example from the Shechina. Pashut. Just as it's obvious when we talk about the Shechina, it doesn't apply. The Shechina doesn't need any sort of correction. Let it be any kind. There's no tikkun. And why does the Shechina come in exile? Is only to sort out the sparks. Similarly is when the neshama comes down below. So the Maimer says that it's similar to exile of Shechina. The neshama needs no tikkun at all, and the only purpose for it coming down is to be misakin the nefesh abahamis, and the nefesh ativus is similar to the Shechina, which needs no tikkun whatsoever, obviously, and it's coming down to be mevarer the nitzutzim. Okay, let's leave it over here, and we'll be mafshach tomorrow. Be'ezras Hashem.
Okay. Have a good day. Have a good day.
Good day. Yeah, thank you.